what we were taught in the military is you have to make decisions, right? Bias for action. You had to have that mindset of bias for action. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Well, in the corporate world, it's a little different because sometimes you can act and it can have serious financial consequences, people consequences, safety, consequences that are very serious. Risk management and risk mitigation was something that you don't learn as much in the
Hmm.
military.
Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe if you communicate better, you live better. As always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Chris, and I'm always joined by Lucy. Lucy, how are you today?
I'm pretty good, Chris. Thank you. Anything that made you happy recently?
Life is good, otherwise, professionally, family-wise, everything is good.
That's
But
good.
yeah, Lucy, I'm excited about today's topic because this is something that you love a lot, emotional
Mhm.
intelligence, and something that I do because I'm a therapist. But we both love this topic about emotional intelligence and how do you treat your people. And I'm excited also because I've worked with a lot of people who are veterans, both active duty and veterans, transitioning back into corporate life, and it's always an interesting switch because I think everybody has a stereotype of military life as kind of like somebody yells at you and you do it and there's no questions asked. And I've had friends who are high ranking in the military. They say, no, that's not like that at all. People will push back all the time or people will argue. But what's one thing is true is like there's still a cultural shift when you move out of there. And so I'm excited about today's guest because him and I are connected on a learning and development uh, community together. So we met through that. I think it's been cool just to meet him and see his journey. So I'm excited that he's able to come on and share. So today we have a director of leadership development over at West Shore Home. So he's doing the same work we're doing just internally. Rick, welcome to our podcast. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm doing good, doing good. It's great to be on.
Hopefully I didn't butcher the intro of why I'm excited, why we're excited to have you on today. But tell us how you got here, your journey into getting to where you are today.
Yeah, yeah, I will. But yeah, you mentioned the military and the transition. So that's kind of the start of my journey was joining the Marine Corps. So I made the decision in high school that I wanted to get life experience because that's what's really important. A lot of the books I was reading, the people that I was interested in, like always talked about life experience. And I was interested in becoming a writer. And what every writer tells you is before you can write, you have to do something to write about. And that just really was like, okay, how can I accelerate this process? And I was like, the military seems like that would be an interesting journey where I'm going to learn a lot and it's kind of outside of my comfort zone. So I was like, let's do that. So I enlisted right out of high school into the Marine Corps. And my job in the Marine Corps, I was in the infantry. So I was an anti-tank missile gunner. Basically just meant I got to ride around in Humvees a lot of the times. So I didn't have to do a ton of hiking, which was good. But I did that for 4 years. And that's was like my first introduction to like hierarchy and leadership and like dynamics. I'd played like high school sports, but this was kind of my first job because that's really what it was. And I kind of grew a lot as a person and as an adult in that job. And I had a lot of learning experiences. And it was really kind of unique for me because that's what I think shaped me a ton. Um, of all the things that I've done in my life, that's kind of the biggest impact on me. So I learned a ton in there. But I made the decision, I need to get out after 4 years. I don't want to do this long term, but I was really kind of drawn to that leadership and that frontline leadership aspect. I love coaching and training and even like developing training methods. I just enjoyed that because it was like, we're trying to do this. What's the best way to train it? And in the military, like you mentioned in the intro, there is a lot of yelling when it comes to that training. And it was always at some point you have to introduce that to create stress because of the training environment. But what are the steps to get there? And I got to break that down and think through how would I want to be prepared for that so I'm not thrown into it. And that was like really fun. And I was like, I kind of like this leadership thing. So I got out and I just started working. I got a job as a frontline warehouse supervisor. And I started doing schooling online. And that was kind of like the start of my career. I was like, I'm going to be in logistics. I really enjoy this. I want to work my way up, get my own warehouse. And I stayed in that field for about 3 years. And it wasn't enough leadership stuff because
Mm,
you got to do some, but for the most part, you were dealing with the front line, fighting fires. Hey, this order needs to go out. This delivery's messed up. You were doing a lot of problem solving and it was a lot of fun, but it was, 50, 60% management. It wasn't that
mm,
leadership, that like leading people, motivating, inspiring. And that's what kind of drew me to the world of leadership development and like, what if I did this internally for a company? Because that's really what I enjoy doing and that's what I'm passionate about. And that led me to my journey. West Shore Home started 4 years ago. April will be my 4 year anniversary. So I've just been doing the leadership development and kind of growing in that. Completed my education. Got a doctorate in strategic leadership through the GI Bill. So, I got so much out of the military. But when I think back to my development, that's where I got the most and when I was a frontline supervisor. And just being in those frontline positions, if you're interested in leadership, there's so much value in doing that in some capacity because you learn the day to day and it's a different experience. I'm talking to managers in my company and I'm like, I do understand what you go through. So I know when I'm telling you, oh, you can read this book and do this and that, I understand your reality and you're just, surviving, you're treading water. So it helped
mm.
me connect a lot and it just gave me so many benefits. So I'm kind of glad that I did that as my journey. It was a very inadvertent path. At one point, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. At another point, I
Mm.
thought I was going to be work my way up to in logistics. And then I settled on this, and this is really what I've been enjoying doing and kind of communicating and sharing those ideas. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of me, where I'm at, and what led me here.
That's awesome. And when you were in the military, what rank did you get to?
So I was a sergeant when I got out.
Okay. So for the people that are uninitiated or just don't are familiar with how
Yeah.
many how what does that mean in terms of how many people you are overseeing?
Yep, yep. So I had they have different so they have ranks and then they have what's called a billet in the military. And that's kind of your job type position, which dictates, your span of control, how many people you have. And I held various of those. So as that rank, at one point I held it as a vehicle commander. So I had 4 people. At other times it was a section leader. So then there were 12 people and I had kind of like 4 subordinate leaders underneath of me.
Mm,
But the way that we worked is we had a vehicle. So as kind of the leader, you were very autonomous because sometimes you would be separated. So you would be operating on your own, hundreds of meters. You don't even see the other vehicles sometimes just because of we're supporting people on foot. So we're kind of intertwined. So you get a lot of autonomy where you're actually making decisions of, okay, where do I want to go? Is this the right decision? What's the mission? And I got a lot of those like
mm,
management strategy, like business acumen from being in those positions. It wasn't as much direct leadership in the military at that. That was more on the training and the back end. When we were out doing the mission, all the guys that we had, I mean, they were so well trained that there wasn't a ton that was going on. You knew what to do and you all had a job and you
mm,
just did it. It wasn't like I had to tell you to do anything. When we were out executing, you just did it because you were trained. It was on the back end where all that leadership went in. And as you translate that to the civilian, like corporate sector, I try to tell leaders, I'm like, if you do all this prep work, you don't have the fires because your team just knows how
mm,
to execute. Your problem is your team doesn't know how to execute, so you're putting out fires and you're dealing with this stress. But if you put in more time training and developing them, then when they go out to execute, it's muscle memory. And that's what I really learned in the military. I mean, training hours to actual hours of doing your job, it's just so skewed. It's easily 10 to 1
mm.
towards training. And that's what made the difference and why it was so successful. So I definitely pulled that kind of mindset and methodology over from the military.
As a leader, what is that like, that mindset of like having so much autonomy to, most civilian jobs, you don't get a ton of autonomy. There's a much more oversight into your daily activities.
Yes, that was a hard lesson I had to learn going into my first job because what we were taught in the military is you have to make decisions, right? Bias for action. And indecisiveness is the worst thing, right? We had a saying in the
Mm,
military, it's like indecisiveness will get you killed. You can make a bad decision, that's okay, but you have to make a decision. So that mindset was like, we trust you. We're going to debrief it in an AR, an after actions review, and we're going to say, hey, why did you make that decision? And as long as you can justify all my leaders were fine. They're like, we can correct your justification and make you think better, but you have to give us something. If you just say, I don't
mm,
know, that's a problem. So you had to have that mindset of bias for action. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. They'll give me feedback on my decision, but I have to have a decision-making process and I have to think and I have to just decide based on that. So
mm,
you had all that autonomy and it was like we'll figure it out on the back end. That's just how the military works, right? That's how kind of war fighting is. We have to act. Well, in the corporate world it's a little different because sometimes you can act and it can have serious financial consequences, people consequences. In my field in logistics, safety, consequences that are very serious, and risk management and risk mitigation was something that you don't learn as much in the
mm,
military.
Mm.
It's there, but only at the very high levels. For us, there was no risk mitigation. It was we have to clear this building. What's the risk? Well, we may get hurt. There is no mitigation. We're doing it. And that doesn't translate. So what the story behind the lesson was I was a warehouse supervisor. I was 2 months in. So I am at this point, I'm 22 years old and I'm leading a second shift, which is comprised of the demographic was 40 to 60 year olds. It was mainly people that worked a second job, and I
mm,
was leading them, which has its own bag of challenges that I had to work through. But I was autonomous because I was on second shift. So
yeah.
after about 5 p.m., I was the only leader in the building for the next 6 hours until third shift leader came in. So I made a lot of decisions myself. And the one time my boss decided, he's like, hey, I'm going to stick around. My general manager said, I'm going to stick around till 9 o'clock tonight. I'm going to shadow you just to give you some feedback because it's your second month here. I want to help you out. I was like, great, let's do that. So we're walking down the warehouse and it's this receiving process. So we had trucks that came in and they would have about 50 pallets of pasta, like penne, all different kinds of pasta. And you would unload the pallets and you'd put them in an area, and then someone else would take those and put them on a rack throughout the warehouse.
Mm,
So there are a couple of different methods for how you did that. I did not have as many people putting stuff away, so they were sitting just in these staging areas. Well, that created a backlog, and we didn't have a lot of those staging areas left. So the next
mm,
shift, third shift, wasn't able to bring product off, which that's their bread and butter
mm,
on third shift because they don't receive. It's the middle of the night. No one's coming to, take a delivery. We're just unloading stuff. So I didn't set them up very well. Well, my boss was giving me this feedback and telling me, and my first instinct in that, as soon as he gave me the feedback, is I gave him my justification behind my decision. And I was like, hey, this is why I did what I did. And I was coming across very defensive of
mm,
like, hey, I'm telling you why I did this. And he's like, I'm telling you what the right way is and why it's right. We're not debriefing your decision making. I'm telling you this process and I'm giving you some guidance from the business side of things. And that was very early in my career. I did that a bunch. I would just get very defensive with feedback because I was like,
mm,
my understanding of feedback was the first thing my leader did was say, hey, why'd you make this decision? And then they correct you. In the corporate world, a lot of times you don't get that. You get, hey, I'm going to explain the situation to you. And that one-sided feedback was kind of hard for me to understand and really see that, hey, this is a kind of
mm,
different world and we need to understand that and you need to adapt to that. And that was kind of the start of my journey of self-awareness because up to that point, I thought I had leadership pretty locked in. I did it in like some pretty high stress scenarios. I was like, I think I'm good, but it
sure.
was a huge wake up call, and that's when I was like, okay, I need to sit back and I need to adapt to my new situation, and I need to learn, and I need to realize that I don't know
Mm.
everything. And I'm glad I learned that. I think I learned it late at 22. It was relatively early, but I wish I would have learned that lesson way back when I was playing sports and stuff. Because I look back and I realize how I was not good at taking feedback and I wasn't good at learning and growing from other people because
Mm.
I thought I knew it all and I could just figure it out. So learning that lesson is definitely key if you want to move up in leadership or just get better in general is learning how to receive feedback.
That's such an interesting breakdown of how people receive feedback because of the way you've done it in the military. That idea that you're separating out, exploring what happened, and then giving the feedback, versus in the corporate world where it could be just all at the same time. This is what you did wrong, and this is what you need to do
Mhm.
differently.
Yep. That's that's been my experience. I do try and understand the decision making, and I try and bring that in sometimes to my leadership style. But I've noticed by and large, it's much more about the facts and what happened and the tactics versus the decision making process. And I think that's something that should change in the
Mm,
corporate world. You should try and understand the decision making process a little bit more. But it's just because the corporate world is more about there's less bias for action I found and more, hey, before you act, let's talk about it, let's think it through. And that can,
mm.
that can hinder it sometimes because you learn best through mistakes. So it's definitely something that, I try to change with our LD methodology, but I do find it's very baked in the corporate world, at least in my experiences.
There's something that's coming up for me. One of my previous clients, he is also ex-military, and now he had a position in the warehouse to be a supervisor. And
Hmm.
what he shared, it was so different from how he was used to leading in military versus in the warehouse, where a lot of the people it's their first job, or as you mentioned, the second job. So
Hmm.
very low priority. So even if they had the training or it wasn't as demanding to know just to put this from this side to that side in this certain way, but what was driving him crazy was a lack of commitment and the motivation.
Mm.
Hmm.
And he was saying it was stressing him out so much that it seems he was able to manage his stress better in the war zone than in the work when he sees somebody and he cannot say anything and it takes
Mm.
forever to take action and do something. So
Hmm.
what would you say to leaders that they see that maybe it's not about the training, it's more about the motivation or their approach? They seem they just don't have the right attitude.
That is spot on. It's kind of what I was mentioning earlier about everyone has that training. In addition to like the training, you also have like you trust the other person with your life. You have to, and you build that up through the training and living
Mhm.
together and all those situations. But there is no, is this person going to do their job? That doesn't happen. You don't really think that
Mm.
way. Is this person
Mhm.
not giving their best effort? You never really think that because everybody is.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like motivating, it is really challenging because not everybody is making a career out of things. Like people are worried about surviving, paying the bills, especially today. It's like this is hard. I'm not focused on how I can grow and how I can be the best employee. I'm trying to make a living. Um, and that was really hard. I did do some things that I tried to connect them to the larger like business. So I was always big on transparency, like talking about performance openly, like the team's performance, the goals. And I tried to like take ownership. I tried to be the one that was like, hey, like if we didn't hit our goals because the team's not motivated, I was like, look, this is my fault. So what can I do to better support you? And I tried to take like that very extreme ownership approach of,
Hmm.
hey, these are the goals. This is how the team's doing. We're not doing that great. This is how the other shifts are doing. This is what the company's targets are. This is why it matters to the company. And I was very transparent with them on those things to try and show the connection of your work does matter to something larger. Like there is a bigger picture here. But then also to just take ownership of the failures I think is the biggest way to motivate because a
Mm.
lot of corporate employees have never experienced that. A lot of blame shifting, You don't see
Yeah.
managers get terminated as much as you see frontline employees get terminated. And I just think it's a complete different perspective. Like you own the outputs to your employees. If they deliver a subpar product, you need to ask yourself, like, where did I fail them in training? Where did I fail them in coaching? Where did I fail them in the task assignment? Like, what could I have done to have a better outcome? And I think when you take that transparent approach with your employees, there is some motivation because they start to see that you actually do genuinely care about them and then they want to work for you. And that's similar to the military mindset where like I didn't want to let my teammate down. Like I was more concerned about my
Mm.
failure getting him hurt than I was myself getting hurt. Like I didn't care about me. I cared about doing my job for the person to the left or right of me. And I wanted, you can't obviously replicate that in the corporate world, but I wanted to try and show them that like it is me that owns this failure and I'm here to support you so you
Mm.
can trust me and try and get them, to want to give their best effort. At the end of the day, I think it's a manager's job to get the best effort out of their employee. If you have an employee giving less than 100%, like you need to look in the mirror and say, what can I do differently? There'll always be those one-off situations, but 95% of the time you can change and you can motivate them. So I
Mm.
tried to really lean into that to like build that camaraderie of like, I am actually here to serve you and I'm your leader and I'm going to take care of you. Because that was the whole thing in the military is very, I mean, even personal life. Like I talked to people about car loans and their finances and just like, I was my
Mm.
job to take care of them because they didn't know. They were 18 years old. They'd never gotten a paycheck before. They didn't even have a savings account or a debit card. And like I took care
Yeah.
of them. So I wanted to show my employees that I'm here to take care of you at work and like I have your back. In return, I just need you to give your best effort. That's all I ask.
Mm. Did you find that that helped that when you shifted into being that transparent and taking that ownership?
I definitely do, 100%. Uh, People just saw me out on the floor and they seemed like genuinely happy to interact with me. Like when I would go up and ask them how they're doing, how their kids are, if I knew what was going on in their life, they just seemed genuinely happy in those interactions. So I don't remember or know if performance improved, but to me, like that anecdotal evidence, if you're
Yeah.
happier at work, that's a win. If the numbers stay the same, but you're happier, like that is a huge win to me. So I would say so.
It sounds like that you show that building the trust, you open the door first in a way, saying, I have your back. You can
Mhm.
trust me.
Yep, that you have to as a leader. You gotta give it to
Just
them, and
start. Yeah.
yep, that's the burden of leadership.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah. You were talking about how like when you are in the military, like everybody's doing what they got to do. Everybody's gonna do what they do, and like what were some of the growing pains when you started realizing when you were in the civilian world, like that's not everybody else's mindset, and that's not everybody gonna respond to the same communication style.
Yeah, yeah, that was really that was a hard lesson I probably learned in my current role. Just
Mm.
transitioning to being kind of like an internal consultant. I expected some subject matter experts to just deliver on the deadlines. Like we got together for a project and we talked and we said, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what's due. We're going to reconvene in a week. You're going to have this ready, right? And then just that not getting done. Um, and it was kind of hard because in the military, you're really all behind one mission. Like there is no, we're working on this priority, we're working on this. It's like we're all united. But in the corporate world, everyone's pulled in different directions. And sometimes it's like, hey, based on my priority list, I have to say no, or I have to delay what you need. Um, and that was really hard for me. But again, it was like I go back to extreme ownership. Like as a leader, part of being self-aware is saying like, what could I do differently? And you have to adapt your approach. And sometimes you have to take on more of that burden based on your role. Like I'm in a support role. I don't make money. I don't install. I don't sell. I don't do that stuff. So I have to understand that I sometimes have to put in more effort to support those people. And that was sort of the shift is really just understanding
Mm.
what the business priorities are. And if a subject matter expert is supporting a business priority, let me work with them. Now it's a different story if they're just, blowing me off or they don't want to participate, then I got to have a difficult conversation with them and say, hey, like what's going on? Like we need to talk. Let's work through this. But most of the time it's just they're busy, they want to help. They just need you to make it easier. So sometimes you have to go a little bit further and it's like I'm doing 80% of the work, you're doing 20% of the work, but we're not operating under the same priority right now. We're doing different things. So how can I
Right.
just expand my view instead of just me and what my team and what my mission is? Like, what's the company and how do we all support that together?
Lucy, this is a very universal struggle for all learning and development folks is working with subject matter experts and getting them to just give you information.
So I'm hearing what works is flexibility and empathy.
It
And
empathy always gets you a long way.
empathy part of emotional intelligence. What is your definition of emotional intelligence?
Yes, I do enjoy the topic. I think it's one that is tied very closely to self-awareness. I think self-awareness is like the first piece of emotional intelligence. But I would say emotional intelligence is really about understanding the perspectives of others. That's the best way I can describe it. And if you want to take it a step further, I think you would say altering your actions based on that understanding is kind of like
Mm,
2.0. That's the hard part, I think. I think people can really develop the muscle to have empathy and understand perspectives, but then to be able to alter your approach, that's hard.
mm,
Especially if you have a certain leadership style. That is the tricky part is saying, okay, I understand you. Now, how do I change in response to that? And that question is related right to self-awareness and understanding, first of all, you have tendencies and some of them are good, some of them are bad. They have a time and place. And you need to figure out, okay, how do I adapt myself? That's, I think, the second degree of emotional intelligence that is really hard. I think everyone is always in the quest to really get that full understanding.
mm.
And I love how you also take the ownership in how do I change my approach rather than, well, they are wrong, but they should change their approach.
Yes, that causes so many disagreements. Is who should change here? It's not me. It's you. You need to change. One of us has to. It's not going to be me.
I find that the same mindset shift needs to happen also for people that come from a little more blue collar work or manufacturing work, where that work tends to be more like go, go, go. Let's just do this stuff. We don't have time to talk about this. We just got to do it. What helped you build that self awareness?
Mhm. Yeah, that's really tough. I am fortunate. We do have a tool. I think some personality assessments can be helpful. We use one as a guide that kind of can give you some more insights. But the thing that I found is just understanding how you react in stressful situations is probably the starting point. Um,
Hmm.
as leaders, that's when you're probably going to act most like yourself. That's when you're going to have your biggest personality swings. That's when the true you usually comes out. So I always tell them like think back to that and then think to some of your communication with employees during that time. How is it? Does it change? Does it
Hmm.
alter? Really try and understand how you act in those situations and what needs to change. I think that's probably the starting point for self-awareness. But you have to learn too. I think seeing the perspectives of others is probably the second biggest thing is like, okay, if I
Hmm.
can see other people, then I can see how I'm different. If you want to focus outward, I think that's a huge thing. Reading has helped me a ton, especially reading fiction. Even watching movies and TV shows that have a lot of emotions, like that is a really great way to develop that empathy muscle and see things from someone else's perspective. The documentaries and stuff, like those are really good tools. And that's what I always encourage people to do as well. If you want to really build the like self-awareness muscle, just think about other people and then see how would I have reacted in that situation? Oh, I would have done that totally differently. What's good about their approach? What's good about my approach? What way should I change? But it's just about being curious and wanting to study other people and study people in general and how people interact. There's so much to psychology and human interaction that I think is so tied to leadership that you have to be interested in that if you're a leader. It's fascinating stuff.
I'm glad you referenced reading stories, things like that, because I'm working on a book with a friend on a leadership storytelling to inspire and motivate change.
Hmm.
And he's a storyteller. He's like a writ author and filmmaker, and he talks about like
Yeah.
there's a lot of neuroscience research about when we watch those things or read those things, our mind automatically puts ourselves in that situation to think about how we would manage these things. So it's like it's a low cost, low risk way to test out how we would do this in this situation. What happens if we do this?
Hmm. Yep, absolutely. It's I just was talking recently about this reading fiction and like how if you people are like, oh, I don't like reading all this personal development and all these nonfiction books. And I'm like, reading fiction is a great personal development tool for that exact reason. Is like
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're interested in, like learning itself is a personal development tool. And I think that's how you understand yourself is learning about things and what your thoughts are and actually reflecting. And even better, if you write it down, you'll really refine your thoughts and you'll understand how you think. So many people have opinions, and I don't know if they understand why they have those opinions, what their deep held beliefs, morals, or values are that make them feel that way. And learning and reading helps you explore yourself and say, why do I think the way I think? And that's key to self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a crazy question. Who is your favorite fictional leader and why?
Ooh, favorite fictional leader and why? So I did just recently finish a really good book, The Good Shepherd, by C.S. Forrester. It was turned into a movie, Greyhound, with Tom Hanks in it. And it's Commander Kraus. So he is a fictional convoy commander in like World War II, and he's shepherding 34 merchant ships through a German U-boat attack. And the book is written third person, only from the perspective of Commander Kraus, but you get his thoughts, third person omniscient. You really understand what he's thinking, and you learn about like the sacrifice of leadership. He's having internal dialogues like, I really want to sit down right now, but what kind of message does that send my crew? They're in the middle of hunting a U-boat and he's been standing for 36 hours and he's like, I really want to sit. My legs are numb. He's like, but what does that tell my crew? I'm, leading the ship right now and I'm going to sit. And it was really just like, what would I have done in that situation and how would I have led? And they get attacked by a torpedo and he has to, talk to the crew over the loudspeaker. Someone was killed and just that was a really interesting perspective. So I
Mm.
really thought the book was great. And it was just such a great story. And I pulled so much out of it, even though it is completely fictional.
What about interesting enough, what about movies or TV shows? Any fictional leaders that you really look up to in the movies or TV?
Yeah. So I definitely think Game of Thrones has a lot of good leadership stuff. Good examples. I always think of like Jon Snow as he was commanding, and you got a good perspective of like the burden of command that he had to assume and the decisions that he had to make throughout that show. And a lot of times I think it was really good for that like decisive action part because there was a lot of dissent and you always saw the leader kind of like say, no, this is what we're doing. Now there was good and bad. Some of them were able to motivate and some of them, not able to motivate quite as well. So it's a good perspective both ways. You learn a lot from the wrong things too. That's for sure.
Very true. Lucy, what about you? Do you have a favorite fictional leader? This is an interesting question we should start asking all of our guests.
It is a really good question. Looking at my bookshelf now.
Hmm. I was thinking about female leaders, and through my, I am probably the only person that hasn't watched Game of Thrones. I know about it. I haven't watched it, but apparently everybody around me has. Um, I was thinking a movie from a long time ago that I just came across recently, or a series, basically, Dr. Quinn.
Hmm. Medicine Woman.
Medicine Woman, yes. She comes to mind because I probably saw it recently, even though it's a very old TV series around and what I admire in her as a leader, where she's been dealing with a lot of adversity, yet she is able to turn situations around, to bring people together, to have everybody be a little bit more empathetic with each other and have a little bit more understanding. So she is, in a
Hmm.
way, driving a change for happier, healthier lives, in a way.
Yeah.
And that's something that resonates with me.
Hmm.
What about you, Chris? Who is your
Yeah,
fictional leader?
I have two. One is Lord of the Rings Aragorn.
Oh.
I think I'm always a big fan of the reluctant leader, the one who's good at it, who's naturally good at it, but he doesn't seek it out, or he or she doesn't seek it out, just because it's not about the glory, but they really just care about the people around them. They want to do good, and so. But I love the idea of that guy that's out there in front. He's backing it up. He's there with you, and you know he cares about you, and you know he's going to do everything. And you know he's not doing it for the glory either. He cares about it. The other one is, do you guys ever watch Chicago Fire, that TV show?
No.
No.
He's not on the show anymore, this character, but Chief Bowden, he was the chief of battalion chief of Chicago Fire Department, and I think he is just a great example of a leader that's got the right balance of I'll let you figure it out versus I need to intervene and do stuff versus I will coach you and train you on how to do this. Or I'll reprimand you if need be, but I still care about you and want you to do the best, and I won't get in your way. I think he's just the perfect example of all that. I'm interested what when you're talking, like what about when you're talking to the people you lead, when you're giving commands, when you're giving feedback, what was the transition or the difference like for you, or similarities even? What was it like for you?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think a big transition kind of related to like the motivation stuff that we talked about. That was the biggest thing is the way you communicate it and the amount of autonomy you give employees is a little bit
Mm,
different than the amount of autonomy you give to people in the Marine Corps and your soldiers and stuff in training. And that was a hard shift. So for example, the training type methodology was very command and control, very, we're gonna bark orders, we're gonna tell you what to do, we're gonna induce stress in these situations, and we're gonna maybe give you a project, but if we give you a project, we're going to be watching over you very tightly. We're going to be, critiquing you along the way, giving you feedback. And it was much more constricted training environment. Whereas
mhm,
when I came out, you really had to give people more freedom. You had to give them
mm,
more autonomy. People didn't want to be kind of like told what to do as much. And each
mm,
employee's different, but I found a lot of employees really want to just like let me run with it, like let me kind of go. So when I was giving them assignments, I would sometimes give them a broad assignment and I'd be like, okay, so here's the assignment. Think about it for a week and then let's come back and talk about it. And then we'd refine the idea some more and I'd get some insights into how they thought and we'd start to kind of align and then I could give them the assignment. So I started involving employees a lot more
mm,
versus in the military, it was okay, I'm going to design this myself and then we're going to go do it. You don't really have a say in things. And that happened to me as well from my leaders. We didn't have a ton of, discretion in what we could do when it came to training, where we largely were at most of the time. So it
mm,
was a big transition to like letting employees be more involved and building that autonomy muscle up and figuring out
mm,
ways to allow that to happen. And then really, I found that the kind of going back to the review process is what really had to change is I had to coach them a little bit differently. And I had to kind of coach them, but give them autonomy in the process. Where in the military, you were kind of told what to do, or you were told why this was wrong, or you were told what exactly to correct and how to fix it and stuff. Whereas feedback now on the corporate side of things can sometimes be, okay, let's figure out how we can get back on track. What are your ideas for this? I'm not going to tell
mm,
you how to solve your problem. I want you to kind of solve it yourself. And I think employees want more autonomy. The command
mm,
and control in all aspects, even if it's small things like changes, they want to be involved. They want people to communicate to them. They want to feel like they're an active part of the process. And I think that is how you motivate them is you do make them an active part of the process. It's like
mm,
if they don't feel connected, well, if they're not given that ability, then that's probably why they don't feel that way. So I've noticed that was kind of a big change. Um, you also mentioned similarities, though. There's definitely a lot, I think, of similarities between the two, especially when we're talking about just like frontline leadership itself. Just for me, when I was in the military, it was always you have to figure out how to put your people in the best place for success. So the preparation, the planning, the practice, that translates over to leadership is I
Mm,
want to plan and put you in the best position to succeed. And all of that like prep work and in preparing employees and giving them training and learning and giving them opportunities to grow, that translated over very well.
mm,
They always wanted that. It was just more so when we're executing, when we're doing stuff, when we're actually working, I need a little bit more freedom. I don't need you breathing over my neck, but I still want to be developed. I still want you to help me grow. I still want you to be involved. And that translates over as like you as an employee do have to put in work. If you're preparing for a one-to-one, if you're preparing for anything, you have to put in the effort. And I felt like that really does translate over is that preparation and that planning aspect of leadership.
mm. That's such an interesting contrast because, in the military, you're saying you're spending most of your time training or getting ready for something.
Mhm.
And in the corporate space or civilian space, a lot of times we're executing and we don't have as much time to prepare. And but what you said before, like the more time we spend on that, and as an LD professional, I'm also biased. Like, yes, let's spend more time on training and development. Um, but yeah, how can, I think your example is great. Like involve people from the beginning, tell them why, tell them the transparency of like how it connects to the larger goal. What else can what else have you learned about helping imbue more of that preparation and training, even in the midst of ongoing go, 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 go execution?
Yeah. Um, it is it is what everyone the hot topic in L&D, right? No one has time for training.
Yeah.
We found that's not entirely true if the leader is initiating it and if the leader is involved.
Mm,
We found success in like just discussions with leaders. So just like, hey, here's an article. It takes you 15 minutes to discuss this, and as a leadership team, you can discuss it together. Um, and then just doing that every day, and those little things do add up because it's in the front of your mind. So you're always thinking about leadership. So when a problem arises, you kind of have that right frame of mind to say, okay, what should I do from this leadership perspective? So we've tried to really encourage a lot of that to make it just very digestible and give them, again, some autonomy in the process. You're reading this article and then you're discussing it. So you're going to share perspectives and hear different ideas. But the burden of that is not very hard. We're just asking you to interact with this material, which the more interesting you can make it, the better. But you just have to talk about it. You don't have to write anything down, although I always encourage you to write down what you want to say to refine your thoughts.
mm,
But I
yeah.
don't ask that, right? You want to restrict the burden. Easiest way to do that is have a conversation with people that you feel comfortable with, your core management team, your friends, your peers. It doesn't have to be like a formal environment, but you want to, as a leader, try and foster those just like, we're going to talk about leadership because it's important to us and it's a topic that we discuss on a philosophical, level every so often. And I think that is something that I've seen have success. But again, as an LD side, you have to curate it. Like we will sometimes send chapter excerpts or podcast snips and say, hey, this takes 5 minutes to read or listen to it, and in your next management huddle, just talk about it for 10 minutes. And that is
Mm,
so much easier than me saying, well, just find some resources for your team. Here are 6 books you can use. And they're like, so now I have to read a whole book, pick a section. And
mm,
it's like, if you give them the resources and you make it interesting, they will engage. Again, it's not going to be remarkable changes, but you're going to have people that are aligned and focused on leadership. And then you can just
mm.
build from there.
I love that idea of simplifying it for them. So you're reducing the barriers to them getting involved.
Kind of micro learning segments.
Yep, yep. I think
Yeah.
I mean, our attention spans are only getting shorter. That is the unfortunate reality of our world. And I think that's something we can lean into. Although I do always encourage them to like listen to it the night before or try and put some time so they can think about it and it's not just off the cuff. But that just, that muscle of learning is something I think we forget not everybody knows how to do. Even
Mm,
if you went to school, even high school, college, not everybody learns that way. And if you didn't do particularly well, like you were mentioning, we have a large blue collar side of the trade. traditional learning methods, maybe that doesn't work for this audience. So we need to understand how can we help you learn better because you've never been taught to learn. You were lectured at for 45 minutes and did homework.
Yeah.
You think that's terrible. Well, yeah, a lot of people don't enjoy that. But what if you listen to this cool podcast clip by someone you know? Right? We can even, I pulled clips from athletes. Tom Brady has an HBR article that I've pulled some stuff out of.
Mm.
And connecting it to like a social figure, someone that everyone knows, they're interested in it. And I'm like, hey, read this article snippet from Tom Brady and talk about it. Okay, I'll read that because
Mm.
I'm interested in the topic. I'm not, pulling some obscure book on, the leadership challenge, and I'm just making it relatable.
Yes.
And it's so easy to get people involved that way. If you get and just try and figure out how they want to learn and what excites them. I've talked to people about like, what podcasts do you listen to for personal development and what do you read for it? And people give me answers. I'm like, I would have never thought about that. I would have never thought about how you read through Reddit threads. I would have never thought that you could do that. And then I go on and look and I'm like, there are a lot of good threads I could, snip and people could
Yeah.
read through. And that's interesting. So I think it's just about being creative, and you can find leadership content everywhere. You just have to be able to get creative and find something that people are interested in hearing about.
Rick, let's imagine that somebody fast forwarded through the entire conversation and they said, you know what, 10 minutes left. I'm gonna listen to the episode. What would you tell them are the 1 to 2 big takeaways from this episode?
Yeah. Um, I think the biggest thing in leadership, self-awareness, emotional intelligence is always check your ego.
Mm.
Always understand that your first opinion or instinct may not always be right. I've gotten into many of those situations where I make assumptions and then I go to my employee and I start talking to them and I'm like, hold on, I didn't even ask you this fundamental question yet. I'm assuming this answer, but I didn't even ask you it. And then I ask them the question and we start to uncover things. And I'm like, okay, you already did that. I was talking to someone today about that. And I was like, I'm assuming that you don't already talk to your employee this way. I'm giving you some coaching based on something that I've seen,
Mm.
but I didn't verify that. And that's just another subtle check. And luckily, I caught myself in the moment in the conversation. I was like, hey, I didn't even ask you this. I made an assumption. Let me ask you this question first. And everything I just said the last minute is irrelevant. So that's, I think, the biggest thing for leaders. Like you have to be able to check your ego. And then that really runs right into the second thing I mentioned a couple times, extreme ownership. I'm a huge fan of that principle. It's a book by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Hmm.
Fantastic idea. It's everything that happens is in your control and ownership as a leader. And when you check your ego, that becomes easier to accept. It's like, okay, I'm not perfect at everything. I don't have all the answers. My team didn't perform well. Okay, that's on me. What do I need to do? Do I need to motivate them? Do I need to train them? Do I need to coach them? What do I need to do differently to help them?
Mm.
And that's something as a leader. If you take extreme ownership, you're going to build trust with your team, and you're also going to build a lot of credibility with your leaders. Because people don't like it when someone
Mm.
just passes the buck, shifts blame, and it's all about being able to take it and say, you know what, this is on me, but this is how I'm going to fix it. And this is how I'm going to get better. And if that's your mindset going into things, you want to take ownership because you're like, okay, we failed. Great. I get to get better. Like failing is a great thing. Making mistakes are awesome because I get to learn. If I do something and you don't give me any feedback, you don't give me any red marks, like, what did I learn through that process? Because I know
Mm.
I'm not perfect, so I have room to grow. And when you attack leadership from that angle, it really just becomes so much easier to understand yourself, be willing to take feedback, and you're able to grow. And
Mm.
that's a hard lesson. It took me many times. I do have one good story about that when I was very disrespectful from back in the military. And it backfired. It was a good lesson for me to learn about that, but I was kind of that know-it-all. I, thought I knew better than my leader. And we were on a training exercise. This was in the desert in 29 Palms, and I was just disrespectful to him a couple times during that training exercise. Well, the next week, he was my direct manager. I was in very early in my career in the military, and we ended up going on a very long run. There was a lot of, physical discomfort associated with that, and that was part of
Mhm.
the lesson. And then, I think it was 45 minutes, an hour later, whenever we were done with this long run exercise, he sat down and talked to me and explained, the purpose of why that happened, and what I did that was disrespectful. And, it was
Mm.
related to the military, so there's a lot of hierarchy and chain of command, but you learn in the corporate world, there's a lot of hierarchy and chain of command too. And that having that awareness was, you know what, I do have to check my ego. And that was kind of a big wake up call for me as well. But that's just something that, if you are willing as a leader to check your ego and take extreme ownership of your situation, it's really hard for you not to grow. It's hard for you not to get better. It's hard for you to have conflicts with other people, because your mindset is one of trying to understand and realize that I could do better. So I'm not going to be combative. I'm not going to be defensive. And you avoid a lot
Mm.
of those personal problems that, I mean, most problems in organizations are just relationship problems between two people, and they just create so much friction. So when you approach
Yeah.
it from that mindset, you kind of avoid some of those challenges and personality conflicts that come up.
Those are awesome nuggets. I think they're great. Rick, this was a really cool conversation. It was cool hearing your journey. Thank you so much for sharing it. Well, how can people follow you? How can people talk to you if they want to chat with you and follow up with you?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on LinkedIn, Rick Fearnbaugh. There's a link to my newsletter. I write a weekly newsletter, my thoughts on leadership. If you're interested in signing up, please feel free to do that. Connect with me, reach out to me. I'm always interested in chatting, especially with other internal LD consultants. Anyone out there wants to talk about strategies or what's worked, what doesn't work, I'm always open to that. That's how, like Chris mentioned, we met through a leadership development group, had a good chat. So I'm always interested in talking. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, Rick Fearnbaugh. But yeah, thanks for having me on. This was really great. I'm glad I got to do it.
It was fun. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks so much.